What if the Cold War didn't end the way we think it did? What if the dramatic fall of the Soviet Union wasn't the final victory lap of capitalism, but the start of a long economic aftershock whose effects we're still trying to understand? And what if the real question isn't which system collapsed, but which one quietly absorbed the hidden costs of its own success? For decades, we were told the story was simple. Capitalism won, communism lost, and the world marched confidently into a free market future. But the truth is far messier. Beneath the surface of growth charts, inflation curves, and political celebrations lies a story of economic cause and effect that loops forward into our present day. The end of the Cold War didn't settle the debate, it transformed it. And the deeper we go, the more the clean narrative dissolves. To understand who really won economically, we have to go back to the origins. Before the slogans and before the collapse, to the moment when two opposing economic blueprints became locked in a global competition neither fully understood. In the early years of the 20th century, capitalism and communism weren't just economic theories. They were survival strategies born out of crisis. Capitalism emerged shaken by the Great Depression, forced to rethink unregulated markets and lean on public spending, while communism rose from the ashes of imperial collapse, promising planned development, rapid industrialization, and equality through central control. Both systems claimed they could build prosperity. Both believed they could do it faster and more efficiently than the other. Capitalism leaned on private ownership, profit incentives, and consumer demand. The Soviet model relied on state ownership, planned production, and mobilization of resources toward national goals. These contrasting systems shaped the global economy for nearly half a century, and each side convinced itself that the measure of success was simple: produce more, grow faster, and prove the rival wrong. During the early Cold War, both systems saw moments of triumph. The United States experienced the post-war boom, with rising wages, expanding suburbs, and new technologies that reshaped daily life. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union achieved breakneck industrial growth, going from a largely agrarian state to a superpower capable of launching satellites and challenging American dominance in science and military technology. But hidden underneath these achievements were pressures that would accumulate slowly, creating vulnerabilities neither side could ignore. For capitalism, the pressure was inequality. Growth was real, but gains were distributed unevenly. Wealth concentrated, corporations grew in power, and consumer culture expanded on the backbone of credit. The system depended on constant growth to sustain stability. For communism, the pressure was efficiency. The Soviet model could mobilize resources quickly, but it struggled to innovate. Central planning encouraged meeting quotas, not improving quality. Shortages became common, and productivity lagged behind Western economies. These problems didn't create an immediate crisis, but they set the stage for a long economic duel where each side responded not only to its own weaknesses, but to the perceived strengths of the other. And this is where the Cold War story becomes one of cause and effect rather than ideology. As Western capitalism began shifting toward financialization in the 1970s, moving investment away from manufacturing and into markets, it gained short-term flexibility, but also created long-term fragility. Asset prices inflated, deregulation encouraged risk-taking. In the short run, these changes looked like innovative adaptation. In the long run, they created the seeds for recurring financial instability. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union faced stagnation. Productivity slowed, technological gaps widened, and attempts at limited reforms failed to overcome internal inefficiencies. When central planning met global energy shifts, including falling oil prices in the 1980s, the system began to crack. This brings us to the breaking point. The Soviet collapse is often framed as inevitable, but its downfall wasn't just the result of ideological failure. It was also a chain reaction triggered by structural weaknesses, external pressures, and internal miscalculations. When the Soviet economy faltered, republics pushed for independence, party control weakened, and the planned economy unraveled faster than leaders could stabilize it. But here's the twist. Even as communism collapsed, capitalism didn't walk away unscathed. The victory came with a price. The sudden opening of global markets gave capitalism access to cheap labor and new consumers, but it also generated dependencies that would reshape the world economy. Industries moved offshore. Workers in Western countries faced stagnating wages. Global supply chains became increasingly fragile and deeply interconnected. In the 1990s, the United States emerged as the sole superpower, but its economic model shifted even further toward financialization. Deregulated markets expanded, debt soared, technology companies rose rapidly, generating enormous wealth but also amplifying inequality. Capitalism wasn't collapsing, but it was transforming into a system driven increasingly by speculative growth rather than broad-based prosperity. The Soviet collapse also created a shockwave in countries transitioning to market systems. Rapid privatization generated oligarchs, asset stripping, and deep poverty. The promise of capitalist efficiency collided with the chaos of dismantling state structures overnight. The result was not immediate prosperity, but a decade of economic pain that reshaped public trust and political stability. This fallout wasn't limited to former communist states. It influenced global institutions, trade policies, and the balance between labor and capital worldwide. The Cold War competition had ended, but the economic story continued, now with capitalism expanding into territories and markets once close to it. Yet the very success of this expansion led to new contradictions. By the early 2000s, global capitalism leaned heavily on debt, cheap imports, and growing financial bubbles. When the 2008 crisis hit, it revealed how fragile this system had become. Banks collapsed, millions lost homes and jobs, governments rescued financial institutions but struggled to help ordinary workers at the same scale. This was not the victory picture many expected after the Cold War. And in an ironic twist, the country that emerged as the most formidable economic challenger to the United States wasn't a revived capitalist Russia, but China, a hybrid system that blended state control with market incentives. It took lessons from both capitalism's dynamism and communism's centralized planning, creating a model that defied old Cold War categories. Which brings us to the modern parallels and the data that challenge the old narrative. Real wage growth in many Western countries has stagnated for decades, despite rising corporate profits. Wealth inequality has reached levels comparable to the early 20th century. Financial crises occur more frequently. Meanwhile, productivity gains no longer translate into broadly shared growth. These patterns suggest that while capitalism survived the Cold War, it didn't emerge unblemished. Countries that transitioned from communism saw mixed results. Some integrated successfully into global markets and built robust economies. Others struggled with corruption, demographic decline, and weak institutions. The promise of rapid transformation proved complicated. The old Cold War question of capitalism versus communism is resurfacing in new forms. Debates about state intervention, inequality, globalization, and the limits of market-driven systems. Economic systems still face the same pressures: efficiency, innovation, distribution of wealth, and resilience. And once again, societies are asking which model can deliver stability in an era of rapid change. So who really won economically? The simple answer is capitalism. It survived. It spread. It outperformed the Soviet model on innovation and long-term growth. But the deeper answer is more complex. Capitalism absorbed enormous pressures from its own success: inequality, financial instability, offshoring, and political polarization. In many ways, the Cold War didn't end with a clean victory. It transitioned into a new competition within capitalism itself, between sustainable growth and the consequences of unchecked expansion. The fall of communism removed an ideological rival, but it also removed a counterweight that had pressured capitalist societies to maintain strong social programs and worker protections. After the collapse, these protections weakened in many countries. Market forces accelerated, and the balance changed, which brings us to the key takeaways. First, No economic system wins permanently. Success creates new pressures that eventually demand reform. A model that wins in one era may struggle in the next. Second, the Cold War created incentives for both systems to hide weaknesses. When the competition ended, those weaknesses surfaced, revealing long-term vulnerabilities that still shape our world. Third, the story of capitalism versus communism isn't really about who collapsed. It's about how economic systems evolve, adapt, or break under pressure, and how societies manage the costs of growth. If the Cold War taught us anything, it's that economic victories are never final. Systems must change or they stagnate. And the pressures facing modern capitalism, inequality, automation, global supply chain fragility, and financial instability are shaping a new chapter that we're only beginning to understand. So here's the open question. If the Cold War was a battle of systems, what battle are we in now? And are we ready for the economic shifts already in motion? If you want to explore more stories that challenge what you think you know about history, economics, and the forces shaping our future, subscribe for the next deep dive.